So, and when you think about marketing in the general term, we say, why do we do marketing? If we're trying to make money and we have sales going up over time, like that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to just make sales go up and to the right. And we try to increase, this is my representation of profit margin. So marketing can be used to either increase this or increase, let's see if this will work, increase the slope of your up and to the right, which is basically speeding up your growth curve. Does that make sense? So those are really the only purposes of marketing, to either increase the slope or increase your margins. And that's true for any business. So if you're in a professional services business, if I'm doing marketing, it's either am I increasing my sales or am I increasing my margin? So an example like that, that would be like a jewelry company who invests a lot of money in marketing, and they're not trying to reach everybody, but what they're trying to do is make you think that they're the shizzle, so that you'll pay more ridiculous amount of money for blood diamonds that people have died for, and all that stuff. But really all they try to do is increase their margin. They spend a lot of money in marketing. So the problem with all this is that we don't really know what the time is with a startup, right? So if your curve's going like this, and this is 2015 to 2016, then it's like, awesome, we're growing, things are great. But if this is 2015 to 2050, you don't have a startup, you have a hobby, right? So and if this is $10 million, that's one thing, but if it's $10,000, it's another thing. So as we're focusing on marketing, in my view, the goal is to shorten this time horizon, increase this number, and increase that slope. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to give context of what we're talking about, because what marketing isn't, it's not pretty pictures, it's not nice logos, it's branding, all that's not what it is. A brand, let's get some definitions out of the way. A brand, there's different definitions, but here's my general definition, which varies every time I say it. So, a brand is the set of assumptions, I like to say like gut or visceral reactions that people have to your company, upon interacting with it. And the point is, the brand is not something you own, it's something that happens in your customer's brain and gut. You can do things that impact that, but at the end of the day, you don't own your brand. The reason this gets confusing is we use the term branding with logos, which came from branding a cow. That's really where it came from, that term. As if that is the action, like you're branding a cow. So that is one thing, but branding, the way we use it marketing-wise, is just the assumptions and how people feel about you, right? So if we have this giant rock of customers who don't care, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to sit and kind of fight against this inertia. So we need to kind of flank it, to try to find ways around the natural force that is inertia. So in typical marketing, we have the 4 Ps, right? And probably everybody knows this. In my opinion, these are great, but they're not that relevant for startup marketing. So we're going to talk about these other 4 Ps, and everybody has their own set of 4 Ps, so like these aren't some gospel. These are the ones we're going to talk about today for you, and because they're actions that you can take, and we're going to do little short exercises, no big deal, to help organize this stuff. So, I'm hoping to just I guess what I'm saying is, most of these ideas are not my own, most of these ideas are things I've stolen from other people. And the first one is really that way, which is positioning, which is something was actually developed in 1972 by Al Rice, this concept of positioning. And the reason this is important is because positioning, underneath positioning, is a bunch of other stuff. Positioning is the slot in your mind, or your customer's mind, that your company holds for your customer, if that makes sense. So it's an example of it happening in the mind. It's basically built in the mind of your customer. It's basically built on this very basic premise that humans are basically barely evolved monkeys who don't have a lot of room in our heads for complexity. And so we simplify things. And so positioning is marketing's response to how to address that psychological phenomena. And so the example, and I'll give a couple examples, but the very classic one to me is when you look at cars. You look at the positioning of all these car dealers or car manufacturers, they're not complex. Volvo equals safety, BMW equals performance, Porsche equals 50-year-old guys trying to act young or whatever, right? The very simple concepts. And I think if we're going to talk about branding, I think positioning is an important topic because it makes you do these other things. You have to understand your customer. You have to know who they are. You have to understand where to reach them. Maybe I have a slide on this. Let's see if I do. I might later, so I'm not going to worry about it. You have to understand how to reach them. You have to understand where they hang out, and that may not be the same place as where to reach them. And so you have to understand and know your customer. The gal who started HomeJoy, which is an online home cleaning service, I don't know how many markets, a lot of markets. She went and worked as a house cleaner, so she could understand both the customer's perspective and the house cleaner's perspective. And she went, and she's like, she's one of these classic, like Stanford or Harvard CS students. I mean, as geeky as they come. And she took that job so she could understand the customer. And so positioning, in order to understand how you're going to differentiate yourself in the mind of your prospects and your customers, you need to be able to describe that. So when you're starting to think about positioning, I guess one lesson I've learned in the last year and a half has really been, you want to figure out how you're going to reach those people. And remember that companies don't buy, people buy. So it's not just like, how am I going to reach, if I have a company that's a product that's targeted towards a Fortune 500 company, it's not how am I going to reach IBM or Apple, it's who makes the decision within that organization. How am I going to reach that person? Where do they hang out? Where do they get their information? How do they make their decisions? That's a lot different process than just trying to define a customer, if that makes sense. And the more you can kind of understand that from a startup perspective, the quicker you'll be able to make that move on that growth curve. And I'm assuming that most of you we're starting with like 0 customers or a very small number of customers. And so that's okay. That's not a problem, but everybody starts there. But it's a matter of, you want to make sure that you can reach that you can reach the big number eventually, and that helps with positioning. Another thing on positioning, as I keep blabbing about it, is that your positioning as a startup should be, there's a paradox here, it should be tight and said with conviction, and it should be flexible and adaptable. So you're going to adapt your positioning slightly. I'm not saying it's going to change, but how you explain it and how you convey it may be changing as you go through it. So okay, we talked about this: define your customer, understand your customer. Some basic examples, and these aren't quite positioning, but like I took my own thing, like WhatsApp, which is a texting app, which like, I don't know if did they get bought for a couple billion? I don't remember if Facebook ended up buying them or what. But the whole point is they're really just a low price, and that's their position. They're low price texting, and that doesn't matter that much in the U.S., but in the rest of the world, it's really important. Zappos is all about insane service. Volvo's about safety. Amazon's about getting everything. And these are very high level. I'm not saying you should be this high level, but it really can start this high level in terms of positioning. And then as we go through this process, we'll narrow that down and get that into a sales process. A way I like to do that is to talk about comparing myself with my customers. So this is a little exercise. So everybody have a notepad or something. You can take like 2 minutes, and the idea is think about your company, your product, and then give yourself a couple axes where you can compare your product to. So like an example, a very simple example, I'm not saying you should use this one, would be low price, so this would be low price, high, maybe that seems weird. Low price, high price, and low quality, high quality, or something. Those aren't really the best examples. Price is okay, but quality is so amorphous. Or it can be any types of thing. It could be, what is your, ease of use versus expensive implementation, or any 2 things, and just take a second and plot on this chart you versus just a few of your competitors within those. Does that make sense? So just don't overthink it and don't make it a big deal, because we don't have to spend a whole bunch of time. But I just want you can take a minute, talk it out, whatever, and then we'll jump in. In the startup land, I think competitors are important, and I think it matters. But I think for a lot of companies, they get way too hung up on competition when there are so many other things you need to worry about before you worry about what the competition is doing. But I think it is one thing to find gaps and holes where your positioning, you might be able to slide in and take advantages of some weaknesses of what other people in the market aren't doing. And then the traditional positioning exercise would be, for whoever your target market is, we are the overt benefit. This is my other real point on that axis off. exercise is when you start seeing those clusters where you're actually close and comparing to, you're comparing, there's not much difference or not much space between you and those competitors. As a startup, doing that inertia, moving that ball, moving that rock, your benefits and your differences need to be overt. They need to be like dramatic differences, like slight differences probably aren't going to cut it, or it's going to be exhausting. So I'd say for who is our market, I'm not going to go into this. This is more traditional marketing stuff, but how you define your market segments. We are the company that does this, and that is it's some sort of overt benefit. Maybe it's a list of benefits. Maybe it's a unique point of view. It could be anything because of blank, which is kind of your reason to believe. There's a lot of different reasons to believe why people should believe you, right? We live in a world where we're over-marketed to, and where it's really hard to tell the difference between good and bad on the outward. Anybody can build a good enough website. Everybody can build a good enough like fake product, like a demo product. They can 3D print it, or they can just do a rendering of it and make it look good. So we need to find what is that reason to believe. And a lot of times that's domain experience, which is domain knowledge, domain expertise. Like you've experienced the problem yourself. For Weavorce, my co-founder was dragged into court 15 times as her parents fought over who should have her and raise her, and she was asked if she was stranded on a desert island, which parent would you want to live with? And that's pretty good reason to believe of why the company is doing this. It's a real, it's a story, but it could also be expertise. It could be that you worked in the industry. It could be that you have the best technology because of these X reasons. A friend of mine has a company called Heap Analytics, which I love to recommend because it's a fantastic tool. Basically, he's the ex-analytics guy for Facebook, and he left Facebook to start Heap, and it basically is rebuilding Facebook's tools for everybody, and it allows you to measure any action on a website, and it's a great analytics tool. But the point is, that's a real good, strong reason to believe, right? When he's able to say, I think his official title at one point was like Director of Engineering at Facebook or something, and so when he's able to claim that, then it's this is good. This technical product is going to pay itself off. And now kind of a veer on this. Positioning is also very important for investors. If you went and tried to pitch a database company, they would say, we don't need any more database companies. That market's not growing. Why would I want to put any money in database companies? If you pitched it as a big data repository, maybe you have some hope, and it could be the same exact product, right? So like you have positioning when you're talking, it's just kind of a side note, something to think about, and I'm not saying everybody's interested in that, but if you are looking at that, positioning really does matter for investors, especially at angel level, because they basically follow the trends, and they want to be on what's hot and try to ride waves and that sort of thing a lot of times. So those are the basics of positioning. There's a lot more, but we don't have time. So the good news is you can Google positioning and find all sorts of exercises, but I believe it's a good way to get you started in thinking. I think the next thing is you have to think about what your point of view is going to be. And a point of view is really the how you're going to communicate this. And I think this image is kind of a good example. It's a Coke ad. And if you just look at this ad, you say, wow, what's Coke's point of view? Like any words that come to mind? Anybody? Happiness, joy, optimism. These are things I think. And they can do that. They do it so well now, they don't use words. Well, they have words. Those are Hungarian words, which I had to look it up to see what that language was. But evidently Hungarians get it too. It's a visual, and they're doing so their point of view is this whole optimism thing that they do. They're selling you sugar water through Happy Babies and whatever, and Clydesdale, they don't do Clydesdales. See, Budweiser does Clydesdales. They do children and whatever, right? And what's that?
Polar bears.
Polar bears, yes. Polar bears. So the reason is pretty simple is, I guess, I don't know, my guess is how many people come from an engineering background here? Is anybody? Okay, yeah, so not that many. That was my guess that there weren't going to be that many. But specifically in engineering background, people always try to logic it, and that's good, but but your point of view is bigger and deeper than that. It's a conviction. And it is also kind of this paradoxical thing where I really believe you need to like go in there wholeheartedly, but then you need to be flexible enough to adopt that language as you learn and take in the input and change. And I always think this is an interesting study. When they run ads, this is basically an ad campaign test where when they ran ads that had just emotional messaging, they had a 31% action rate. When they do just rational, it's a 16%. And when you mix them, it's 26%. So that is why the Super Bowl is filled with all these stupid ads, because they're all going for this emotional benefit, because that is actually what is selling. And so that is why GoDaddy, does what it does, is because they're trying to make you think certain things about them, not really worried about selling you their performance or whatever. And the data shows that. So as I think about point of view, I think you want to make sure that you are being, you find your authentic voice, that you, and this could be for even technical products. There can be a real, that authentic voice. And I like to think of a lot of times a specific person I'm trying to reach. So you can do back to this customer segmenting, kind of understanding your customer. It's like I like to not just envision a person as a demographic, 18 to 34-year-old men with incomes of $45,000 plus. I like to go, okay, what does that guy drive? What does he drink? Does he drink soda or beer? If he drinks beer, what brand of beer does he drink? And these sorts of things where you try to build a richness. Is he married? Is he not married? Where does he live? If he lives in Boise, what neighborhood would he live in? What kind of car would he drive? How old would it be? And you try to build this richer persona so that when you are developing your point of view, it helps you actually tactically create a message that resonates with someone, because it's hard to write to a 18 to 34-year-old male. But it's a lot easier if you can write to your cousin Marvin and just kind of imagine that. And so as you're creating this communication side of things on the marketing and trying to get the wheels spinning, I think so much of when we think about branding and advertising and things, it really, what we associate with, a lot of what we associate with is basically point of view elements. So a lot of people talk about advertising or your logo and photography. And that really, all that is, like what feels good to you is really just whether or not you are within the tribe that sees and understands that point of view, if that makes sense. On Built in Boise, our most read story is a story on a fantastic company called Cryptic. Cryptic's a camouflage company out in Eagle, actually. 3 guys out in Eagle. They've been in the last 2 Call of Duty games. They've been in, coming out in Jurassic Park, their clothing, their camouflage patterns. And as I dug into the data, I'm like, okay, why is this spreading? Why is this story so popular? Something like 8,000 page views or something like that. And it's a single page story. And I think a lot of it is that group of hunters. So if you take, it's for hunters, and kind of their concept is that they take special ops kind of gear and are spinning it out, or quality gear, and are spinning it out for consumer usage, originally in hunting and camo patterns and stuff and other features. And then also, but now it's becoming like a fashion item, and police are buying it because it just makes them look tough and things like that. And so the whole thing, where I'm going with this, is that when you reach a group like hunters, and you show them something that matches their point of view, then all like spreading and sharing and marketing happens essentially organically. I hate to put it that way, and that doesn't mean like that's some sort of silver bullet. I don't mean that at all. But I just mean that it's amazing what happens there versus other groups that don't have those same qualities and that don't buy into the same point of view. It's a little less clear. That particular article was written with a stronger point of view. It was written kind of with a military, their military background story versus some of the other companies that are a little more vague. So I just think point of view, I know that's kind of a vague thing, but it's like I want you to think about, like, it's how do you approach the problem, and how is your unique perspective going to have an impact on your customers' lives or business? So it's so let's go use Heap as an example. The Heap Analytics. Heap point of view, I haven't talked to him about this, I'm totally making this up from my read of it. Heap says, Google Analytics is great, it doesn't capture enough. My point of view is, with modern technology, storage is basically free. Why don't we capture every single data point ever that happens on your website and then pull what we need when we need it, instead of kind of the flip of, which is what happens now, which is we set limited things and then push ourselves the stats, right? If that makes sense. And that's their point of view. And then, that kind of makes sense. And that's a very technical product. But it's like, I see how you're different than a Google Analytics or a Mixpanel or these other analytical tools, if that makes sense. Okay, so positioning, point of view. Purple Cow, which is a Seth Godin concept, and I just think it matters because these kind of build on each other. The basic premise is this: listen, you're driving through France, you see cow after cow after cow. As you drive through the countryside, you see a purple cow. Now that's something you take a picture of and you send home, right? So like, what purple cows? It's a concept that's been around. I'm old enough to remember certs with Retsin, right? I don't know if anybody remembers that. Certs with Retsin. Retsin was sugar crystals that were blue sugar crystals. But dang, if I didn't want those certs, I don't even know if they have certs. I imagine they still have certs, I don't know. And that was just simply a purple cow. And so these purple cows can be strategic, they can be tactical, but no matter what, they need to be talked about. And I was trying to think of good examples, and I think this is kind of a new, interesting example, which is Magic. And this is another YC company. This is their website, which in itself is kind of a purple cow. I've told, and this is what Magic does. Magic, you text something, now you can't, it's San Francisco right now, I think, only. You text Magic to that number and ask them for anything, they'll get you that anything. And the first time you give them a credit card, then after that, it's done. So, hey, I want a pizza, two pepperoni pizzas delivered, the water cooler, okay, bam. And the purple cow is, the product is kind of a purple cow because it's insane that they can do this, and they are doing it. And it's interesting how they're working, because what they're doing, their point of view is that, hey, there are all these services. These are services, I don't know if everybody knows it, like Instacart, which is a grocery shopping service. I always want to say Sling Flower, because that was my wife's company. This company totally stole their idea. Bloom That, which is a flower delivery service. And all these different like instant delivery services, Uber. Why do I have to go to all these individually? So Magic says, I'm rolling that all up. You just text us and we'll make it happen. And there's actually some interesting engineering and things go on about it. But what's interesting to me and purple cowish about it is like how, like that is not a pretty website. But like that's their strategy. Their strategy is to like make it engineering-ish, to start this conversation about it and to draw you into one thing, which is the phone call, the text message, to engage with them. That's their purple cow. And when we think about purple cows, let me read my notes. This goes back to the whole overt benefit thing. Like if you don't have if it's not so visceral and like either pain or joy inducing to somebody at some level, it's just really hard to make that push. And I'm not saying any of this is magic bullet. I'm actually a big believer in the blocking and tackling of building a business. Like a lot of it is just doing the basics really right. But boy, it's a lot easier if you have these pieces in place and you think, okay, what can we do that is shareable? In startup life, the last P is prioritize. And I think if you take this seriously, you will find that your number one issue is your time. Your number one asset is your time. And so you cannot do it all. And so all these things, the positioning, the point of view, and the prioritization, or the purple cow, are designed to help you naturally prioritize, right? So you're kind of actually giving yourself a box. I used to hate when I was in the agency business, people would say, just think outside the box. It's like, that's actually not how the most creative people work. They want give me the box, and then let me play within that box. And these techniques can help you give yourself that box. Give yourself that positioning box, now you know where you're playing. Understand your customer, now you know where they're playing. Understand your purple cow, now you know the box in which you're playing. Because you have to figure out how to prioritize. So a brief aside on some tactical stuff. If I'm starting a company today, I do invest on a few key tactical things from a branding perspective. I do invest in a logo. I don't think that has to be a professionally done $8,000 logo from Drake Cooper. they're great. But I'm not saying that's what it has to be. There's brand crowd, or literally stock logos. You can buy good logos for $300. They look real. I do generally believe that is a good investment for a few $100 because it saves you a lot of money and time down down the road. Yeah, and so, but like a lot of these are just shortcuts to save you time. So I'm not saying get a logo because it's going to transform your business. I'm saying get a logo because it'll help save you a lot of time down the road, because now all of a sudden you have a palette of font and color and tone and all these things. Like if you design a logo, it gives you a tone that you can actually gives a lot of hints to the rest of the website design even, right? So that's not a general, it's a good little thing. I also like to invest nowadays in good high quality photography. You can do that really cheap now. If you have a physical product, there's things like, iShootCans.com. You ship off a can and they send it back a photo. It's like, like a wine bottle. And then you get like this beautiful photo back with the nice highlights and whatever. And it's like $70 or whatever. Or good stock photography. Even iStock has a premium brand, but Stocksy, there's some other high-end stock photography things that capture the tone. All I'm saying is these things are worth investing in a little bit. I'm not saying go over the top. That's my tactical thing. And the reason is it helps you prioritize down the line. But what I really think the secret for starting startup marketing and prioritizing is to find your wedge. And your wedge is the thing, the place, the activity, the partnership, the message, it could be a tactic, it could be email marketing. It's that thing that gets you in the door with somebody. Because having started a few companies, and to me, that's actually what drives me. I just like to build stuff. It's really fun just to make stuff. But it's not really fun to make stuff that nobody uses. But I'd rather have 10 or 100 users that are totally stoked and love my product in the first, say, 6 months. I'd rather have 100 users that are totally stoked than have 1,000 users that are meh on my product, because that's how I'm going to learn. So I'm looking for my wedge in, and the reason is because what you're going to do is you're going to try to expand that wedge. You're just going to keep growing that wedge. It's just like you're chopping firewood, right? I think a great wedge story is T-Sheets locally. Matt Rissell out in Boise, and I've known Matt for a long time, and I remember when his company was on death's door, and he was like, "What are we doing?" And they were thinking they're going to shut down, and then they had this idea to integrate with Intuit's with QuickBooks. So they have a timekeeping software. And Intuit, and I guess what's really interesting about this is QuickBooks already has timekeeping built into the app, into the software. But they said, maybe there's an opportunity we could do a little better. We're on phones, we can do a little more. And that little wedge to them, when I left Boise a year and a half ago, or whatever it was now, 2 years ago, and I'd done some work with them, there was 8 people out there. When I came back, there's 50 people out there. And it was all because of that little wedge where they just started, here's this little Intuit thing, now we're going to expand. They grow their business through Intuit, and then they're growing their business through, then they have the credibility to go out and get some bigger other wins. And so a side message on that, this is actually my wife's comment, which is, one thing, if you're in this, now that you're in this world of starting and building stuff, I really hope that you'll take a minute and be somebody else's wedge. Be the person that'll be willing to try something new. It's ridiculous in Boise how many of our companies have to go outside Boise to get their first sales instead of being able to get sales within Boise. T-Sheets is an example, but there are many other examples. And so part of being of looking for a wedge is also being a wedge. And when you look at culturally why places like the Valley, Silicon Valley, and other places can generate it. And there's a lot of reasons, and it's complex, and I don't necessarily think we should try to be them. But one reason is people will try anything there. Somebody is willing to step into that Uber for the first time with a stranger. Now we go, that's no big deal. Or Airbnb, and you're going to sleep. Airbnb was literally air, bed, and breakfast. It's an air, bed, and breakfast. Somebody slept on Brian Chesky's living room floor on an airbed. Somebody was willing to do that, and that's how companies get started. And so as you look for the wedge, it can be in very small bites, and I think you should be comfortable with that. And don't get distracted of this, but this won't get us where we need to be. We want to, our goal is to get to 3 million sales year 2, and this is only $20,000. Let's go for this other thing. My recommendation is to find that little wedge and just keep expanding it, because you don't know where it'll go, and you'll learn so much in the process that you'll be able to iterate as you go. I know that's kind of a amorphous concept, because it really is, a wedge is different for every single person and every single company. A big saying that some of the smartest people I've known have said is, do things that don't scale. Like when you're in startup land, you can get so consumed with getting from 0 to 1 million users that you say, well, I can't do this because I won't be able to do it when we have 100,000 users. And I think the whole idea is, it doesn't matter. To build that wedge, you need to do whatever it takes. And for Brian Chesky, Airbnb, I keep using them because I just think they're a great example. If you don't know the Airbnb story, I'm not going to tell it, but it's an amazing story. They're graphic. The CEO, Brian, is a graphic designer, so I have a soft place in my heart, because graphic designers have annoyed me for hours upon hours. And but he started this company, and they were stale and they couldn't do it. And they found out that the reason was people didn't like the photos. They had users putting up photos, and they just looked dingy. The lighting was good. People had point and shoots back then, and cameras then. So Brian flew out to New York City and just started knocking on doors of all the people who had listings on Airbnb, and they went in and started taking professionally done photos. And obviously, you can't scale to whatever they are now, a $500 million company. You can't scale that to there, but it sure got that wheel going, and it was kind of a wedge. So I think that's really important just to keep in mind. I already said this, but this idea that companies don't buy, people do. I think way too often, and we're starting the marketing process, and I know this crosses over into sales. Like, I don't really know in startup land where that line is between marketing and sales. Marketing to a company and marketing to a person are two different things. And we have to remember that companies indeed are not people, despite what people tell you. Companies are made up of people. Humans are people. They make up companies. Humans are the ones who make decisions. And if I had my preference, if I was starting a new company today, I always want to be able to locate, find, and know my economic decision maker, who has the actual power to make a decision to buy and write the check. I don't want to go into things that I'm selling to big organizations. And so if you're selling a product to school, ed tech is really big, right? And I have a friend who has a company called, Padlet. And Padlet is this kind of, he described it as, another interesting example, he described it as a new way to blog when I first met him. And it's really just a visual, it's like a wall that you can drag pictures and text and things on. And what he found as he's going through this process is that teachers love them. He's like, teachers love us. So then he started going to all these educational trade shows, like where all the administrators and people hang out. Well, they didn't want to buy anything like that, because that's just too, the idea of implementing policies and controlling content over a whole school district is just no. But if your logic is, hey, I'm going to sell this to school districts, I just need to get 3 school districts and I'm at profitability, that seems like a great plan. Until the rubber meets the road and you're like, those aren't really the people that care about my product, because they don't have the pain. So he started reaching out directly to teachers, and gave it away to teachers first, free. And that teachers started using it, so they're doing a unit for like 3rd graders on U.S. history. 4th graders, Idaho history, right? They do that 4th grade. And I think, or 5th grade. And you do pictures, and it's kind of like this Prezi type thing where you can scan, say, okay, and talk about this bit of Idaho history visually, and then slide over here and see this and whatever. And so those teachers start using it. And then the teachers start requesting their PTAs and things, give them funding so they can upgrade. And then the PTAs start talking to the principals. Hey, could we get a group subscription? And then the principals start talking to the district, and now they're selling to districts. But the reason is the people who the product actually impacted was a teacher. That's whose life it made it easier. Even if the ultimate economic decision maker eventually is here. So you have to always try to find that path, if that makes sense. And I think in big companies, that's a real problem. And big companies will lead you on, and tell you they're going to buy. And some middle manager's telling me, I'm running it up the flagpole, and nothing's happening. So I'm trying to get to the person who's actually feeling the pain, getting it in their hands and letting them use it, because it's the people, it's not the organization, who really matters. I'm going through some like my random stuff now. Identifying magic moments. I stole this from the growth guy at Facebook. Can't remember his name. And anybody guess what the magic moment, the determining moment when you joined Facebook of whether or not you stay or not? Any ideas? Like when, like how far into the process do you have to be? Any ideas? Go.
When your boss busts you.
Well, it's a little sooner before that. It's when you see your friends, when you get your first friend or your first friend request, and you get that dopamine rush of, oh, I'm loved. Facebook is great because it makes me feel loved. And and so they started optimizing their growth towards that. I just had this feeling like I was falling over, towards that magic moment. And every company has a magic moment. Interesting thing for us at Weaveworks is we just had somebody who got divorced using our service, who now is becoming a Weaveworks certified professional to help other families because they had such a great experience, which is like crazy. But like we're discovering like, oh, there are different magic moments even in the divorce process, which is a horrible by almost every account process. So if you can find those moments where people like that they actually care about. So if you're, again, this is where it'd be really awesome if I knew exactly what everybody's doing. But if you're doing an analytics company, I love analytics. But like, I think the magic moment in analytics is like the moment the guy who's in charge of analytics gets to show his boss or her boss that report and explain exactly what it means, and it's clear and it makes sense, because nobody does that. Nobody, all that data is being collected and then nobody presents it. So I think there are different magic moments. And in order to find all this, you have to, you can't see data. That's data. You have to make friends with data. And I don't believe you can do marketing in 2015 without being a data analyst. I think you should, it's part and parcel to the job. Because marketing is not it is a creative endeavor, but creativity, and this is coming from a guy who, I made a lot of money in the days by making clever TV ads and things, right? And that's all great, but that's not where we're at today. That is not the buying process. The world's too cluttered. And so you have to figure out how you're going to understand the data. And by that, I mean, and if you say, oh, it can't be measured, everything can be measured. It's only a matter of how much you want to spend, and maybe it's not worth it. And I agree with that. There's things that aren't worth spending the money to measure. But if you're in the digital world, is everybody a digital product or no? Can we say that or can not say that? No, we're not even saying that? Or not sold digitally at all?
It used to be pure technology-based.
Yeah. No, and it's okay. And it's just hard for me. The lever, and I'm not a technology snob, but I just think technology is so cool because there's so much leverage there. That's why I get so excited about it. But either way, you can measure through survey, you can measure through interviews, you can measure, there's lots of ways to measure satisfaction. And you have to understand this. I'm going to throw out just a couple terms that aren't very common, and I'm sorry if this is, I don't want you to spend too much time on it, but as you advance, I think it's important. Net Promoter Score. And what's interesting, Net Promoter Score is a calculation of basically it's that question when people ask, would you recommend us to a friend or family member? What they're really asking is they're calculating a Net Promoter Score. And there's a calculation with it I won't go into, but what's interesting about it is it's a benchmark. A lot of companies use it, so you can measure other types of companies. And so like my Net Promoter Score, it's going up, but it was at 36%, which is kind of not, like in a lot of industries it's bad, but for Weaveworks it was at 36%. And we got a question from an investor, why is your Net Promoter Score so low? And I said, really, what data do you have on other divorce companies and their Net Promoter Score? Because I'd like to know, but the truth is we're the only one in this category. But if you're in other categories, you can compare yourself using the Net Promoter Score to other companies, and I think it's a really great tool. Some other basic data things that you should know. CAC, customer acquisition cost, and there are different ways to calculate it and different belief systems. Basically, whether or not I subscribe to the belief of you try to include everything you can, including your salesperson's time. So what you're trying to do, if it's a self-bought product, you'd say, how much did my ad cost to get them there? How much did I spend on other marketing averaged to that one sale, and divide that and figure out how much it cost you to buy that customer. And there's different theories on that, and a lot of people use in a startup world, if you're around 30% and of your gross price when you're starting up, it's okay to have a 30%-ish type CAC, and then that goes down as you gain momentum. But you should know the answer. If somebody asks you the question, how much does it cost, to acquire a customer, you should have that answer. You need to understand your conversion, you need to understand your churn. So your conversion, simply how many people are converting to a sale. I like to understand my conversions at different stages in the pipe. So from my sale, from inquiry to trial, trial to demo, or inquiry to conversation, or whatever you call it, pitch to demo or trial, and then demo to sale or trial to sale. And I want to understand what are my conversion rates. And the reason this data is important is because then you can target fixes to the problem. You can find your problem spots. You got to know this stuff so you can figure out where the problem spots are as you develop. Is your messaging, so to tie this to marketing, it's like, oh, is my message wrong? Is medium wrong? Is the creative wrong? Like, what is it like? Why am I losing people at this certain point? But in order to do it, you can't go by your gut. Use the data, because it's also amazing how often our guts are wrong, even our perception. A natural tendency of humans, of course, is to overinflate the bad and like play down the good. If that makes sense. So like classic for us, we have my bookkeeper. We have to fix. You have so many people whose credit cards go bad and won't charge. And so you should actually look at the number. It's like 2 people, but those 2 people are causing her a lot of pain. So it seems really big to her. But we can't use her gut instinct to decide our priorities and how we're going to deploy our assets to make her life easier. If that makes sense. So if you don't understand, if you don't measure things, you can't fix things. And then churn, which is really applicable to SaaS, service type products, where you're saying how many each month or each week or whatever your segment is, how many people are leaving the service and not using it. And that's important because if you really look at growth curves, a lot of secrets to growth curves is really retention. It's so much cheaper to keep a customer, something like 10x, I don't remember the exact numbers, cheaper to keep a customer than to acquire a new customer. So churn is actually, for a lot of people, ends up being the actual murderous part of growth, because they're so busy over here bringing people in the door that they don't realize the back door is wide open. And so, for Facebook, they use that magic moment. They use all these little tricks to try to keep you from churning out, because it really boosts the numbers on the other side. It's not in a process, it's an event. So the basic concept here is it's in a process, not an event. I think that you see my paranoia about the silver bullet thing, and the reason where that comes from is that in the world that I live in, so many people have that idea, that perspective where if I could just do this one thing, if this comes through, then it'll all be okay. And what I've seen works on the marketing and branding side is to just plant those seeds. Spend your time, make your list, know what you're going to do, spend every day planting those seeds, and eventually something grows, right? But if you just ignore that kind of process, and just kind of like sit there and watch the dirt for the thing to sprout, it just doesn't happen. So I guess my recommendation here is dedicate enough time to marketing that you can actually make progress on it. Make it part of the business sales cycle, whether that is a day a week or 2 hours a week, but calendar the time and put effort into it, preferably uninterrupted input, just like you would if you're starting or doing any other task within the company. Because if you don't do that, and if you only deal with the emergencies, then you'll have nothing but emergencies.